As the 1800s came to a close, the Progressive Era brought sweeping business, government, and social changes. The outcome included shorter working hours and better wages, resulting in more money and time for American citizens to spend on entertainment. Ragtime, the title of E. L. Doctorow's novel, is a descriptive term for a uniquely American style of popular music, and more broadly for the time period when it emerged and gained popularity. A contraction of ragged time, the term also evokes the energy, optimism, and insecurity of the national culture during the transitional years between Chicago's World Fair in 1893, where ragtime first reached the general public, and the end of World War I, when it was replaced by jazz. Americans in the 20th century had more and more leisure time. In the early 20th century, films were becoming popular, and in theaters, films were shown in black and white with only silent background music to accompany them. Baseball and boxing emerged as America's most popular sports. One of the most dangerous sports of the era, however, was motorcycle racing. Approximately 1 in 3 motorcycle races ended in crashes that were fatal for drivers. In this time period, horse racing and Houdini also entertained Americans in their newfound free time.
In the 1900s, football was popular in only a few Ivy League colleges, and basketball had yet to catch on. The upper class preferred expensive, showtime sports like tennis, golf, horse racing, sailing, and polo. Baseball, however, was already America's most talked about sport and was fast on its way to becoming a national obsession. Amateur baseball teams had existed for decades. By the 1900s, every small town had a fiercely competitive league. Professional teams, meanwhile, had been around since the 1880s and began to get really popular. In 1902, professional teams had an overall fan ratio of 3.5 million people, and by 1911, that number had nearly doubled to 6.5 million. The American League was established in 1900 to rival the National League and to organize the teams. The rival leagues played the first World Series in 1903, with Boston defeating Pittsburgh. Also, the first baseball stadium was constructed in Pittsburgh, following soon by similar stadiums in Chicago, Cleveland, Boston, and New York. The famous baseball anthem, "Take Me Out to the Ball Game," was first heard in 1909. During the 1910s, tennis was seen as a sport for the wealthy. It was played mostly in private locations or in clubs that only the wealthy could enjoy. Back then, tennis was played on grass, but as the sport grew more popular, they were built on hard cement or asphalt floors in public areas.
In the early 20th century, most professional bouts took place in the United States and Britain, and champions were recognized by popular consensus as expressed in the newspapers of the day. Among the great champions of the era were the peerless heavyweights Jim Jeffries and the New Zealander Bob Fitzsimmons.
Other famous champions included lightweight heavyweight Philadelphia Jack O'Brien and middleweight Tommy Ryan. On May 12, 1902, lightweight Joe Gans became the first black boxing champion. On December 26, 1908, heavyweight Jack Johnson became the first black heavyweight champion and a highly controversial figure in that racially charged era. Prize fights often had unlimited rounds and could easily become endurance tests, favoring patient tacticians like Johnson.
Golf. By 1900, there were 267 clubs. During the Roaring '20s, the game expanded greatly in popularity, and by 1932, there were over 1,100 golf clubs affiliated in the USGA.
The popularity of collegiate football grew as it became the dominant version of the sport for the first half of the 20th century. Bowl games, a college football tradition, attracted a national audience for collegiate teams. Bolstered by fierce rivalries, college football still holds widespread appeal in the U.S. The origin of professional football can be traced back to 1892. The first professional league was the Ohio League, formed in 1903, and the first professional football championship game was between the Buffalo Prospects and the Canton Bulldogs in 1919. High school football dates to the 1880s and enjoys regional popularity even today. The ancient Olympics from Greece were brought back in 1896, the birth of the modern Olympic Games. In 1894, the International Olympic Committee was formed and hosted the 1896 Games in the Panathenaic Stadium in Athens. These games brought together 14 nations and 241 athletes who competed in 43 events. The Olympics are held every 4 years and are still held today, with the Winter Olympics taking place in the opposite 2 years. Ragtime originated in African American music in the late 19th century. descending from the music and style of early African American bands. At the start of the 20th century, ragtime became widely popular in North America. One of the major pioneers of ragtime was the renowned African American pianist Scott Joplin. Two famous songs of his are The Entertainer and Maple Leaf Rag. This new radical musical genre served as one of the major precursors to blues and jazz that would come later in the century. Jazz musicians like Wes Montgomery and Louis Armstrong would take the stage in the 1920s, and ragtime would fade away, only to make brief comebacks in the 1950s and 1970s. The Entertainer by the great Scott Joplin. A guitar rendition of Scott Joplin's Maple Leaf Rag.
Because the TV was not yet invented, the radio was the main source of entertainment for many Americans. It did then almost everything the TV does for us now. If you tuned in at the right time, you could catch comedy shows, news, live events, jazz, variety shows, drama, opera, you name it, the radio had it. The Frenchman Louis Lumière is sometimes credited as the inventor of the motion picture camera in 1895. Other inventors preceded him, and Lumiere's achievement should always be considered in the context of his creative period. Lumiere's portable, suitcase-sized cinematograph served as a camera, film processing unit, and a projector all in one. He could shoot footage in the morning, process it in the afternoon, and then project it to an audience that evening. For the first 20 years of motion picture history, most silent films were short, only a few minutes in length. At first a novelty, and then increasingly an art form and literary form, silent films reached greater complexity and length in the early 1910s. Charlie Chaplin, whose character of the tramp perfected expressive physical moves in many short films in the 1910s and 1920s. The trademark of Chaplin's tramp were his ill-fitting suit, floppy, oversized shoes, and a bowler hat, and his ever-present cane. A memorable image is Chaplin's tramp shuffling off penguin-like into the sunset and spinning his cane whimsically as he exits. In 1900, Broadway extended from the Star Theater on 13th Street to the New York Theater on 45th Street, with numerous theaters popping up around the street, as well. Patrons were paying $1.50 to $2 each for the best seats to see their favorite stars. At the Casino Theater, a British production came to town, Florodora, a play about romance and perfume on an island in the Philippines, had a bevy of lovely ladies twirling parasols and a string of gallant gentlemen in the morning suits singing "Tell Me Pretty Maiden" to them. The song, the plays, and the girls all became instant favorites. Florodora was a huge hit. The show ran 553 performances and was revived many times. All 6 of the pretty maidens became the wives of millionaires within a very few years. Although not an original cast member, 16-year-old Evelyn Nesbit, that infamous girl on a swing, became a Florodora girl. She went on to greater fame in 1906 when her jealous husband shot and killed an architect, Stanford White, her versatile but unfortunate lover, at a production of Mademoiselle Champagne at the Madison Square Theater. White's house, where the infamous red velvet trapeze was installed, can be seen on West 24th Street. The second sign of transformation was the acceleration of the argument for realism in theater. 2 playwrights were introduced to American theatergoers in the 1890s. Both Henrik Ibsen and George Bernard Shaw had plays produced by American companies, different styles perhaps, with different focuses and intentions, there were thinking man's or woman's plays. While at the time they each had only a cult following, it wouldn't be long before their works were greeted enthusiastically.
The Ragtime era was a transformative period in American history. New sports and activities emerged, and cinema became an enormous industry. Broadway dazzled and Houdini shocked the world. As World War I brought the Ragtime era to a close, America was enjoying a period of extreme change and transformation as the 1920s approached.